Hi, welcome everyone to People Analytics World New York. It's the first People Analytics World conference that's taken place stateside, so it's a big day. So a big round of applause for Barry for putting it on. I've just been talking to several people actually as people are taking their seats, and it sounds like there's a hunger for People Analytics conferences in New York. So there are over 300 people that are registered for this conference over the 2 days. So it could be quite busy. So my name's David Green. I'll be your host on this stage, which is the plenary stage and also the strategy stage. Michael Moon, I was looking for you, Michael. Michael Moon will be hosting the impact stage, which is right across there. And what I'll do is I'll direct people at the break today what's going to be happening on each stage after the break. So hopefully you'll be able to stay up to date. So who has been to a People Analytics World Conference before in either London, Amsterdam or Zurich? There's a few of you here and a few of you that I recognise who've spoken at that conference as well. So People Analytics World has been established in London for 10 years. We celebrated our 10th conference this year in London, and we had about 400 people there as well. And it's emerged as a kind of the premier People Analytics conference, the other side of the pond. But we're on the big side of the pond today. So, from speaking to people earlier as well, although this is taking place in New York, it's quite a global conference. So, how many people have we got from Europe? And I include the UK in Europe, by the way, just to be clear. So there's a few people from Europe. Australia, I know there's some Australians around. Maybe they're on jet lag at the moment. And then from the US. Yeah, okay, so it's overwhelmingly a US crowd. That's good. And then a couple other questions. How many of you are people analytics leaders or work in a people analytics team? Okay, so that looks like most of you. How many of you are other HR professionals, HR business partners, CHROs? A few people there. How many people are consultants working in the people analytics space or technology vendors? Okay, so it's mainly practitioners. That's good to see. So, let me get you some logistics. So, as I said, my name's David Green. I'll be your host. I'm also I host a Digital HR Leaders podcast, and I can see some of the people in here, like Ian, who've been guests on that in the past. And also, I'm a managing partner at Insight 222, so we're one of the companies exhibiting today. So, network name. So, firstly, this is the most important thing: be able to get online and get over to the wireless. So, the wireless that you want is the Marriott Bonvoy Public. We were looking at the conference one, but it doesn't seem to work particularly well. So this seems to be the best wireless network to get on. And the reason to really get onto that is that will allow you to download the event app. So if you just take a picture of the QR code, if you haven't already got the app, I definitely recommend getting hold of that. That has an up-to-date schedule on it, because there may be changes to the schedule through the next 2 days. It also has an opportunity to post questions. So if you're listening to one of the speakers over the next 2 days and you want to post a question, you can do that. And Michael and I will have some iPads with the questions that we can use to ask some of the speakers. You also need a fallback position for me because sometimes I'm not so good with technology, but I will ask you to put hands up as well, and there'll be people running around with mics as well. So, let's get the conference trending on social media. I imagine LinkedIn is probably the best. How many people actually still use Twitter or X? Yeah, I'm not sure Elon. Not sure Elon's done a great job there, has he? Sorry? A fake X account. Okay, so Michael has got a fake X account. People aren't using X, it doesn't seem as much. So LinkedIn is definitely where we can get it trending. Let's get the conference trending as well. Huge thank you to the sponsors. These events don't happen without support from the technology community. So you can see there's a whole range of companies sponsoring this as well, which again is indicative of the growth of people analytics that we're seeing as well. There'll be a number of demos taking place during the breaks and at lunchtime. And if Michael and I are as sharp as we usually are, we'll just kind of signpost which technology vendors will be doing some demos at lunchtime as well. Okay, I think we're ready to go now. So we're going to start. I'm going to introduce myself, which is all a bit strange. So I'm going to share some insights from some of the research that we've been doing at Insight 222, particularly into a question we get asked a lot at Insight 2. What are the leading companies doing? How are they creating sustainable value with people analytics? And how are they setting up their people analytics functions as well? So I'm going to share some on that. And then I'm going to invite Ellen Tomasian from Talent Neuron, and she's going to talk to you as well. And then we're going to have a joint a Q&A together. So that's kind of where we're working this morning. So just let's get started. How many of you read Deloitte's Global Human Capital Trends Report? And I'm not just doing this because Deloitte are one of the sponsors. I genuinely do read it every year and have done for over a decade. The opening paragraph of this year's trends was really kind of encapsulated the challenges that we face as practitioners, but also the opportunity that we have both as people analytics practitioners and HR practitioners as well to make a difference in our workplaces, but also to the employees that work for our organization as well. And it also encapsulates, I think, what we're seeing, certainly with a lot of the companies that we work with at Insight 222, that HR is shifting from its traditional role as a support function to being much more of a strategic partner to the business. And people analytics is so important in that. We had our Insight 222 client retreat last week just outside Amsterdam, and Janina Vos, the CHRO of Rabobank, was talking. She's also a member of the supervisory board at Rabobank as well. And she basically said at least 3 times how people analytics gives her credibility at the board level and credibility as a CHRO. So a lot of you in the room who are people analytics practitioners, you're enabling your CHRO to have more of a say at the top table. People analytics is growing, and I'll share some stats on that in a minute. Cole's going to share some stats tomorrow that suggest that it might not be growing, so it's always good to have the counter view as well. But our own research at Insight 222 kind of identifies 5 factors that have been driving growth in people analytics and helping it create more impact, and also more influence as well at the board level. So we all know that we're adapting to new ways of working. We had the great remote working experiment through COVID. But now, obviously, companies like Amazon are telling everyone to get back in the office. Bit of an outlier, but it gets a lot of press. But we know that with a lot of the people analytics professionals in the room here, you're doing a lot of work to kind of help your organizations understand the impact of hybrid within. And it's not just about how many days people come into the office as well. It's about things like who does the work as well, if you think about technology. It's just trying to provide a little bit of data. And again, thinking back to last week, Janina shared how the people analytics team at Rabobank have given her the information to have that conversation with the board, who are very keen for people to come back into the office and to actually show, well, the data tells us that we don't need to do that, and actually it's going to have a detrimental effect. Obviously, it's complex because in different organizations with different types of employees, that story could be different. We certainly see, and again, we've got a panel about this tomorrow around how people analytics enables work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Certainly in the 5 years that we've been doing the people analytics trend research at Insight 222, we ask a question: where is people analytics adding the most value in your organization? And the last 3 years, DEIB has come out as the area where it's adding the most value. So I guess as people analytics professionals, we can help that continue, hopefully, even if there are challenges associated with that at the moment. Who's helping their organization around skills, and maybe you building a skills-based organization? So there's a few there, and I think there'll be some talks about that. Ellen's going to be talking about that a bit later. So again, certainly we're seeing a lot of the companies that we work with at Insight 222, and a lot of the companies that contributed to last year's trends research. Over 50% of the people analytics teams that responded, and that was over 270 companies, are helping their organization tackle this skills question. And then it's around digital transformation, not just from an organizational perspective, but from an HR perspective as well. People analytics teams helping develop tools, either through the technology vendor from buying tools and bringing them into the organization, but also developing themselves and getting them out to people managers and HR business partners in the organization, and just delivering some of those digital HR products, but with data obviously backing them up. And certainly, again, from the research that we're doing, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, obviously we're all trying to embrace generative AI, both as individuals and as organizations, and we're increasingly seeing that certainly from an HR perspective, people analytics teams are being asked to lead the way, which kind of makes a lot of sense. So just some stats around this. Certainly, the one on the left is from SHRM. They did a report last year around people analytics. And I think this is quite a good stat, really, that 94% of business leaders say that people analytics helps elevate the HR profession, and talks to a little bit what I was saying about Yanina earlier. In the research that we do at Insight 222, which we're doing on an annual basis now, people analytics teams are increasingly having a broader remit across things like employee listening and workforce planning, and increasingly either reporting directly to the CHRO or to a direct report of the CHRO as well. So 90% of the 271 companies there. And that helps people analytics, have more impact and make sure that it's working on the right things. And again, from last year's trends research, we asked, who's doing work directly with the board, and 83% of the 271 companies were doing that. If we'd asked that question 3 or 4 years ago, then we've got a much lower figure there. So again, helps understand the impact of that. And in terms of the growth, we first started doing this research in 2020. At that point, the ratio of people analytics professionals to overall headcount in the organization was around 1 to 4,000. So again, in a 100,000 person organization, around 25 people in a people analytics function. A little bit of a sneak preview of this year's research that we published in November. That ratio has now dropped to 1 to 2,500. So again, in a 100,000 person company, essentially, it's gone from 25 to 40 people. So again, indicative of the growth of the function. So what do the leading companies do? What are companies doing who are creating this sustainable value, who when the people analytics leader might leave the organization, and we all know it's a fairly transient market at the moment because people who lead people analytics teams successfully are in demand, that they all won't fall apart. And that someone will be able to come in and replace them and still deliver value. So we're going to look at some of the characteristics around this. These got insights from the annual research we're doing. I'll also share some insights from this study around the operating model for people analytics, and we have some copies of this on the Insight 222 stand as well. And also a couple of case studies from the book that Jonathan and I wrote, which incredibly was published now 3 years ago. My God, time certainly flies. And if you want to access any of those resources, certainly the reports, that QR code will get you access to those. They're all free to download as well. The book, although we do have some copies of the book on the stand, the book you'll probably have to go to Amazon for. So what are the leading companies doing? So again, this was based last year around, it's based around 5 years research now, principally last year based around 271 participating companies. And what we saw is that there are kind of 8 characteristics in 2 groups of companies who tell us that they're creating business value with people analytics on a consistent basis. Part of that is around investment, and part of that's around value and scaling people analytics. So let's start with investment. So partly this is where the people analytics leader reports to within the organization and the relationship that they have with the Chief Human Resources Officer. That is a very strong partnership. It enables the CHRO in many organizations, but it also helps the people analytics team get access to investment, but also access to the key topics that the organization's facing. But what we also found on that influence side is the people analytics leader and the people analytics team are having a very close relationship with other parts of the business, so whether that's general managers, but also particularly with finance. So in leading companies, the people analytics leader is meeting with the CFO on at least a quarterly basis on a topic to do with people analytics, and they're meeting with the CEO on at least an annual basis, and in many companies more often than that, again, to work on a specific topic relating to people analytics. And that kind of lends itself nicely into the second, which is around business priorities. So again, the people analytics functions in leading companies are focused on the most important business priorities within the organization. They're not choosing themselves what work they're doing, but they're working with general managers, with C-level people within the organization as well to identify what are the key topics that we can apply people analytics to, and they're continually reprioritizing that as well. So in many of these companies, they actually have a group that meets on a regular basis to review the priorities for people analytics. The third one is around skills. Talk a little bit more around this, about certainly around the capabilities that companies are building into their operating model for people analytics later. Again, in the first research that we did in 2020, we identified around 14 key roles in people analytics. What we wanted to do in the research last year was understand which ones are the most important. Where are those leading companies hiring and developing and retaining key skills? Maybe no surprises that one of those areas is in data science. The two other areas were around IO psychologists or behavioral science. And then the third one was around consultants. Again, which consultants really supports that business prioritization as well and influencing stakeholders to actually take decisions and measure the outcome as well. Fourth one is around ethics. Again, when we first set up Insight 222 back in 2018, one of the first co-creations that we did with these early organizations that were part of the group was to help them co-create an ethics charter. That was based around the time with GDPR coming in Europe. I think, with the ethics piece, it's even more important now if you think about it with AI coming in as well. And I know many of the people analytics leaders in the room are part of the committee that's looking at responsible AI policies within their organizations as well. And then the second four on the orange side is around value. So this is about measuring value, and still our research suggests this year that not enough companies are measuring the value of people analytics as well. I'm working closely with finance on that. And then the last three are around scaling people analytics. So democratization, essentially getting data out to managers so they can make decisions in the flow of work, decisions around HR and people matters such as hiring, promotions, pay, etc. But also giving managers insights about themselves as well and how their behaviors are either driving engagement or not driving engagement, and driving performance or not driving performance. Personalization is very much baking in some of the work that we're doing in people analytics into products that employees can use and gain benefit from. And then the last one is around data-driven culture, which I'll come to later. So how do we develop the skills that we needed within HR, but also HR leadership teams? And what's interesting, again, an early insight from the research that we'll be publishing in November, is most companies are now getting quite good at actually getting that data out to people managers and through HR business partners. But the actual adoption of it is still quite low. So we do have a challenge around adoption in people analytics, and I think we'll hear over the course of the next 2 days from practitioners and how they're trying to tackle that. So those 8 characteristics, the value and the investment, allowed us to plot those 271 companies that participated along a 2x2. That's what consultants do. They create 2x2s. But basically identified 4 different types of people analytics teams. So A teams, those are having a decent amount of investment and creating value on a consistent basis. B teams, companies that maybe have quite small teams, maybe not that well invested in, but do have that occasional flash of brilliance and are creating value. C teams, where they actually get lots of investment, but they're not necessarily creating a lot of value. And there's been a couple of examples of that many of us will know about. But most companies seem to fall in the D team bucket. They're still underinvested in, and they're still stuck in reporting, essentially, and not be able to create a huge amount of impact. So, you know what's coming next. Most of you are people analytics practitioners, so we're going to do a Menti poll now. We've got 3 Menti polls actually this morning. So again, if you just use the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and type in 32885671. And then, is the people analytics function at your company today, is it an A team, a B team, a C team, or a D team? And all voting is anonymous, but we will see the aggregated results in a minute on the screen. And when I share this deck with Barry later, that will come out and make available to you, we'll put the results in there as well. So I'll give you a chance to do some voting, and then I'll ask my colleagues at the back if they can switch the screen and we can see some of the results. And I'll have to look over there. Oh, good, there's not many C teams in the house, so quite a few A teams. That's good to see. That's probably the speakers, I suspect, that you'll be hearing from over the next 2 days. Quite a lot of B teams, and not as many D teams. So actually, when we did this research, nearly just under 60%, 59% of the 71 organisations, were D teams. So we have got more of the creme de la creme in this room. So it's a great opportunity over the next 2 days to learn from each other. Okay, we've got quite a few votes there. So if we go back now, because I'm conscious on time, let's dig into 3 of those areas. So business prioritization, skills, which I'll come back to at the end with operating model, and then data-driven culture as well. So prioritization, it's another 2x2, believe it or not. So when we work with organizations at Insight 222, and they're trying to get out of that D team area, really, we've got what we call the complexity impact model, which is you can read about in the book. And it'd be interesting how familiar this is for those of you in the room that are doing people analytics. We find that most of the requests that people analytics team, we call them trivial endeavors. It's the stuff like, can we have this data? What's the attrition number for this business? It's lots and lots of requests for quite small bits of information, but it's easy to get buried in it. And that's where you're kind of servicing your customers within the business, but you're not necessarily be able to create an impact. And it's quite hard to break out of that as well. What we want, of course, is more quick wins. So we want something that isn't particularly difficult or complex to do, but potentially has quite a high value within the organization. And that's where that prioritization piece comes in so important. But we also want some big bets. Ellen's going to be speaking in a minute around skills, and that's a big bet. That's going to take time to collect that data, but the reward is potentially really, really high as well, based on some of the results that some organizations are getting on that. You don't want too many big bets, probably. If depending on the size of the team, you probably want 2 or 3 big bets that you're working on at any one time. You want as many quick wins as possible, and we accept that we probably have to do some of the trivial endeavors. What we don't want is the pet projects. So this is usually when a very senior person comes to the team, they've got a brilliant idea, and they want you to work on something, and you're like, oh my God, that's going to take absolutely ages. They're going to suck up all the resources of my team. But it's a really senior person in the organization, so I kind of feel that I have to do it. And I guess what we need to do as people analytics professionals is be a little bit braver sometimes at pushing back, and maybe using the cover of those prioritization groups as well, so actually people can talk it through together, and then that senior person can be told, actually everyone thinks this is a bit of a stupid idea, and we might want to do this instead. But it still takes a little bit of bravery. And if we can get that right, as practitioners and people analytics teams, we can create a huge amount of value. So one of the case studies in the book is from Swarovski. So they had a very, very small people analytics team, around 5 people. They had another part of HR that was doing their reporting. So they were able to focus on more strategic opportunities. And initially they were working on a piece of work for the retail business in the UK where attrition was quite high. It came through an HR business partner. The people analytics team were able to identify a couple of areas where that they could maybe put some improvements in place around recruitment, around people getting a pay rise after 3 months after a period of probation, which is quite common in the UK, and which wasn't happening. They went to this is where they got clever. They went to the senior business leader in the UK, so the person running the UK retail business, and they said, "What do you think?" And she was like, "That's really interesting," which isn't always a good thing to hear from a Brit. But what I'd really like to find out, actually, you've piqued my interest here. What I'd really like to find out is what are the key people factors that drive conversion rate in our stores. So those of you that work in retail will know this is an important business metric, the number of people that come into a store to the number of people that buy something. So the team went away, they worked on a number of different hypotheses, they worked with that business leader and some of her team and the HR business partners to actually investigate that. And what they were able to do is plot all those different branches or retail branches against each other, and they could look at customer traffic versus retail sales. And they identified 5 people elements, which you can see on the chart there, including retention, scheduling, store manager attributes, sales consultant attributes, and training of staff. And they were able to work, if we get these 5 things right, and we've got HR programs in place for this, or we could put HR programs in place for this, we can turn more of those store A's into more of those store B's. And actually, our initial piece of analysis, if we'd got that right around attrition in the first year, would have saved around €300,000, a not insignificant amount of money. But actually, if we can do that, if we can do the work around this conversion rate, we can potentially help the UK retail business bring in another €40 million a year. So quite a big difference, huge business impact. Not surprisingly, the head of UK retail sales was very impressed, and she got the people analytics team time with the board to actually present this. And then, not surprisingly, they wanted to roll this out into other markets as well. So big impact through actually a small team. So onto the data-driven culture element. So there's still a big gap between CHRO's expectation around creating that data-driven culture in HR, the 88%, and actually having a data-driven culture in HR. Now, this number has ticked up over the years, but as you can see there's still a big gap. And a lot of companies wanted to investigate this. So we found 4 things. I'll only go into these briefly at the moment because we're looking at time here. So role modeling by the CHRO and the HR leadership team is really important in terms of creating a data-driven HR culture. And if that means upskilling the HR leadership team, then that's what we need to do. We also found that you're far more likely to create that data-driven culture, and HR professionals were far more likely to take the training that's been prepared for them if the responsibility for upskilling sat with the people analytics leader. Not isolated completely, obviously, from learning, working with learning partners as well, and with the support of the HR leadership team. But we saw that where that people analytics leader is involved in that, it's worth it. It's worth the investment in time in doing that. I'll come back to the 5 skills in a minute. And there is a budget. You actually have to spend. And we through the research that we did, we identified that you're probably looking at spending around $800 per HR professional per year. You'll probably spend more on the HR leadership team and on the HR business partners than you will on some of the HR generalists. But this is quite a big effort, and it's multi-year. And it's change management, essentially. It's not just giving people a training course and thinking, right, we're a data-driven HR function now. So on the 5 skills, we identified 5. One is around the ability, this is for HR professional generally, the ability to consult with business leaders, to be able to frame business questions and develop hypotheses, the ability to be able to manage stakeholder relationships and influence decision-making, being able to interpret data from a chart or a table. What's the one insight or the 2 insights that I need to share with my customer in the business? Being able to actually develop actionable recommendations and storytelling. And I think we've got conversations about some of those skills as we move forward. So next poll is around those 5 skills. So if you think about your organization, or for those of you that are not working within an organization, but maybe working with many organizations on this topic, for each of those 5 skills, strongly disagree whether you've got that skill within your organization or strongly agree. And then we'll look at the results of that as well. And if we can look at the results on the screen. So I'm having to look over here now. So quite a range across. So the kind of the blue mountain, as it were, shows a range from well, basically 1 to 5 and averaging out around 3.2. People analytics leaders seem to be quite responsible. Most of you haven't defined the core skills, and there isn't enough investment. So this was quite similar when we did this poll in London, actually, 6 months ago. So not unique to the US, but quite interesting. It shows that we've got a huge area for improvement around this. We can again go back to the polls. Sorry, that's the slides. I'm gonna skip this. I'm going to focus on this. So this was a skills piece that was talking about as well. So 5 years ago, when we did the People Analytics Trends research in 2020 at Insight 222, we also wanted to understand around what was the operating model for People Analytics. You know, how are leading companies setting up their People Analytics function to deliver success? And obviously, since then we've had a pandemic. We've had generative AI. So what's the impact of some of those factors, and also the field has developed as well, and we've seen growth. This is the study that we've got copies of on the stand. So very, very high level on this at the moment. We've seen kind of 6 factors around this. So firstly, there is a value chain. So you look on the far left, it's what are the drivers that we're trying to use People Analytics for? Business strategy, to help business strategy, help us compete within the market, and stakeholder and requirements of business stakeholders, and what are some of the outcomes that we're trying to develop. So that could be commercial value, that could be workforce experiences for employees, for leaders, for managers, and that could be organizational change. We know how much organizational change is going on at the moment. So if we set that up to deliver those outcomes, then that's going to help us. We're seeing people strategy at the center. So we're increasingly seeing people analytics being coupled with people strategy, and an almost symbiotic relationship being developed between the two. So of the people analytics practitioners in the room, how many of you also have responsibility, your teams have responsibility for people strategy as well? So a few of you, okay. The third area is around some of the core capabilities that we're seeing within people analytics function. So this is the dark orange. So these are some skills and capabilities. So that consulting element that I talked around, so that front end consulting team that's facing off directly with the business, working alongside the HR business partners to identify the key priorities within the organization, and getting to the question between the questions, and maybe getting some hypotheses that we can test using analytics. And then on the other side, the adoption piece. So the adoption piece that I've talked about, where we do still see a challenge around there. So it's not just about making sure we work on the right things, it's about driving change and driving action and measuring the outcomes. And then the 3 areas that we see as being core parts of the people analytics function is that data science and research, so that data science and that behavioral science coupled together, responsibility for employee listening, and productization. So Ian O'Keefe, sorry to point you out again, Ian. Ian's been talking about productization in people analytics for a number of years. We're starting to see more and more companies do this now, whether that's through a buy or through a build, or a combination of the two. And then the lighter orange are the non-core skill capabilities that we're seeing within leading companies. So interestingly, one of those non-core is reporting, which has traditionally sat with people analytics, but we're seeing being decoupled in some organizations as well. You don't necessarily have to have responsibility for reporting to deliver success on a consistent basis. And then other areas around data governance, around workforce planning, which I personally think will change as we move through the next couple of years, and AI strategy as well. And we'll be hearing about some of those during the week. And then around that is some of those stakeholders that you're working with, both within the business, whether that's in HR, within the business, functional stakeholders, but also some of that ecosystem on the outside. And we really call this an ecosystem that people analytics functions are doing. So I've got 2 minutes. So the other thing we saw in there is the 3 different profiles of people analytics leaders that are emerging as well. And what we saw with some of these is now that, like the portfolio analytics leader, where they're looking after people analytics, but they're also looking after a number of other different functions. So that could be HR technology, that could be HR operations, that could be people strategies, as I've talked about as well. And some of the organizations, we're seeing that that person is almost emerging as the number 2 within HR, and maybe we might see more people analytics leaders evolving into the CHROs of the future. Although it must be said, when I speak to people analytics leaders, most of them don't want to do that job. So we'll see about that. So last poll, and again, this will probably take a minute or so. So those of you that are in the room and operating in a people analytics team at the moment, which of those core and additional capabilities do you currently have in the people analytics function in your company? So again, the QR code, or it should just be the next poll that's teed up. Now you've got to go through 9, so it might take a little bit of time. But if we can get that on the screen, that would be great. Oh, look at that! People are already doing it. Interesting that reporting is still coming out there on top. We'll keep voting on that. So, if we go back to the slides, I'm conscious we've got 25 seconds. So, going to finish with a case study. So, one of the organizations, I think, Google was the poster child of people analytics a decade ago when we started People Analytics World in London. That poster child is probably now Microsoft. Either whether through Kathleen Hogan, the Chief People Officer, or Dawn Klinghoffer, they're sharing quite regularly some of the work that they're doing within people analytics within the organization. And this quote from Kathleen, I think, encapsulates the opportunity that we have as people analytics and HR professionals to infuse data into all areas of HR. And by taking that approach at Microsoft, and a lot of the case studies that they share are in relation to their approach to employee listening, which couples traditional surveying methods, but also some of the more ambient, as they call it, which is probably much nicer than passive, ambient listening as well. They're able to answer all these questions there on the right, and they've published research around that. So, for example, the last one there, the second to last one around there around in person, which is probably research that a number of you are looking at the moment. They wanted to understand when are the in-person moments that matter most at Microsoft, and they identified when you start a new role, when you kick off a new project, and for team cohesion. So intentionally bringing teams together on a regular basis to actually drive that cohesion and drive that collaboration and innovation as well. And I think that's important research that we should all be doing as organizations. So, thank you very much. I will be on stage for the rest of the next 2 days. Apologies for that. But if you want to also download our research, you're able to do that via the QR codes. That's the Insight 222 research. And after Ellen's session in a minute, Ellen and I will be on stage for questions before the break. So thank you very much.